sure we are all agreed on that. Dumbledore must have made a mistake with the line, said Madame Maxime, shrugging. It is possible, of course, said Dumbledore politely. Dumbledore, you know perfectly well you did not make a mistake, said Professor McGonagall angrily. Really, what nonsense. Harry